Okay, hello everyone. It's very exciting to be here. There's a lot of faces that I don't know, which is always exciting in the crowd. I threw together this presentation to give you a general sense about how OSTP is approaching a lot of science and technology challenges and how we see video games as a really potent tool, and VR and AR, which there's been a lot of discussion about throughout the conference so far, in addressing science and technology challenges, but also civic engagement, youth engagement, and a whole slew of others, and where our priorities are in addressing some of those challenges. However, I think I will give you a little bit of context in terms of my orientation in this community too. Last year, I was working at the Department of Education, and we co-sponsored the first Games for Learning Summit with the Office of Educational Technology, Games for Change, Entertainment Software Association, Microsoft, a bunch of other awesome people. And we really started trying to figure out how the Games for Change community can coalesce a little bit more strongly around this idea of using games to transform education, and what are the real opportunities for doing that, and how do we design games that actually have an impact on students that really need and can benefit from those technologies, and not just helping the kids who are already going to succeed based off of where they are in having resources in their communities and all of the rest. So all of that is to say, quickly about me, I am a real actual gamer. So I'm not just coming in here to pretend that I know what I'm talking about. I actually, in a different life, was a competitive World of Warcraft player and miss that game dearly, although I do Hearthstone when I can now. And this very much frames my experience in understanding what is the real power of video games, and how you can't just slap gamification and video games on top of a really hard challenge and expect people to think that that is fun and engaging and rewarding. You really need to build something exciting and powerful and emotionally connective from the ground up if you're going to use this technology effectively. So we fully recognize that, and I think you will also see that that's where some federal investment is now going, and we are building this community, and we want more people to be part of proving what works. So, to give you some context on some of the things that we have done in this space, back in 2014, we actually threw the first White House Education Game Jam, which was a convening of about 100 game developers, 20 or 30 or so teachers, and students that came together to Washington, D.C., and ultimately the White House, spent a full 48-hour period building and designing new educational games and apps, and actually working together, the entertainment developers and the educators, to come up with really interesting new technologies that we could actually try and see and experiment with. And some of those have actually gone to market, which I'll talk about briefly. So, our theory of the case with doing this particular event, and this was this was before we did the summit, we were trying to figure out, okay, we know that the games for education space has existed for a decade or so, longer than that even. How do we make sure that the kinds of games that we're creating, that there's less distinction between educational games, looking and feeling and behaving a certain way, and the kind of games that kids actually like to play and enjoy, looking and feeling a very different way? How do we make sure that the talent that is making those amazing, incredible, innovative technology, visionary, boundary-pushing games, how the talent that is building those is also contributing to improving public education? So what we did was we thought about getting those people who are really good at making entertainment experiences but have very little deep knowledge about education and pedagogy to sit down and brainstorm with the educators, and then orient them around real challenges in education and real needs that educators have when they're trying to improve outcomes for their students. This is not a radical approach, but it is one that I think we need to do a little bit more coalescing around if this community is actually going to have a recognized impact in the field, and it's going to be seen as a valuable add to administrators and superintendents and whoever else is running a district's budget in terms of investing in the kinds of tools that will have some sort of positive outcome for kids. So the Game Jam was awesome, and we had a lot of characters who you might not usually see in the White House participating. And we had the crew from Magic Leap, and we had people from Ubisoft and Angry Birds and PlayStation, people who really know fun and really know what it means to create an experience that you can just lose yourself in, and isn't trying to just take a quiz and drap it on top of a playful experience and sort of bounce you between those two experiences without really thinking about how the gameplay is the assessment, how getting to level 60 in World of Warcraft proves that you're good at World of Warcraft. You don't have to take a quiz. When you get to level 60 to prove that you're good at that game, you got to level 60. It's the assessment. That is the assessment. So a few examples of the things that we had come out of that event. We had a game about the ecosystem by Ubisoft that basically did this really fascinating thing. It was sort of a hybrid of Pokemon meets Tamagotchi meets I don't know. It was fascinating because what you did was you could create your creatures, and here's the wolf shark in its prime, and you could unleash it upon all of your other classmates' creatures, and they all shared the same world, and they would interact based off of whatever features or traits you gave them, and sometimes those would work really well together and have amazing synergy, and sometimes you would have a wolf shark that would totally decimate the entire population, and then it would die too because it had no food left. Great learning experience. We had some awesome math games. We had a game about gloobs, which are small and sadly doomed creatures that would face this onslaught of natural disasters, and if you didn't have the right traits at each natural disaster for your population to survive, inevitably some of the gloobs would die. But some of them would live if you had played effectively to diversify your gloob population. And then, of course, even stuff like space simulations, which when we're thinking about how to just excite kids about the boundaries of space and time and how to help them visualize just how huge things are in the universe and make them feel that sense of gravity. Games can do that like no other platform or medium can. Now, I'm going to mention a few things that Richard and Seth, so Richard talked this morning, or Seth talked this morning. He's our Chief Technology Officer, Senior Advisor on Education, and Richard Kulata is now the Chief Innovation Officer at Rhode Island. They both mentioned some of these things, so I'll blow through them. EdTech Developers Guide. So we released this shortly thereafter, which is an actual toolkit that may be handy for all of you who are actually trying to figure out what to build or how to build it so it's effective and meets real educator needs. It's an awesome free resource that is available at tech.ed.gov. Talked about the Games for Learning Summit. CS for All is President Obama is in fact the first president to write a real line of code, which is awesome. And we are still driving this effort forward. We want to see it possible for every kid in this country to have the opportunity to take a computer science class in their school. Because right now, there's only 5 states that even let kids get credit towards graduation to meet their math or science requirements and to use computer science towards those. There's a real equity gap, too, in terms of a lot of the schools that we see that don't have mathematics classes past calculus or science, advanced science classes tend to also be minority, have a majority of minority students, or tend to be in high poverty areas. And so when we're thinking about the generation of kids who is going to actually be building the next generation of software and tools and things that our society uses, we need that group of people to be really diverse, because if it's just straight white dudes, they're just gonna build stuff that straight white dudes want. That's not great. So we need everyone to have this opportunity to participate in creating the next round of innovative, radical things. So back in October, the president released a testing action plan where we took a step back as federal government and we said, okay, clearly this standardized testing thing needs to be rejiggered a little bit. How can we make sure that we are keeping in mind that we need to keep schools and districts and government accountable for reaching every student and making sure that every student is getting the resources and support that they need, which is the real purpose of these assessment systems. But how do we make sure that assessment isn't also in some way negatively impacting the learning and the experience of school for students at a personal, individual level? How do we rethink that a little bit? How do we do less testing and better forms of assessment? How do we rethink it? And part of that comes back to the point that I made very early on, which is games are assessment in the most embedded and pure form. You play the game, and as you progress and as you reach that level, you prove that you are effective and good and skilled at those things. And you can diversify in which part of the game you are really good at. And how do we bring that design philosophy into our education system, whether it's through actual games or whether it's just through the design process of how we do school? Portfolio-based assessment. We would love to see amazing examples of schools or districts using portfolio-based assessment to actually demonstrate and account for every student and how they're progressing through their education by letting students build the things and create the things that they're passionate about doing. And that is possible, and we support that, but we need to see those examples, and we need to get that community better networked so that those things are possible. We have this big movement called the Nation of Makers. Last week, actually finishing up today, I think is the last day of the Week of Making, National Week of Making. The president issued a proclamation to make this the Week of Making. We kicked it off at the White House, announcing a bunch of champions of change, of making, people who are driving this movement forward. When we're thinking about how to make education more playful and enjoyable and to let students be the creators themselves, this is the initiative that's really recompiling our sense of how students engage with technology and become creators themselves. Citizenscience.gov, if you're creating something awesome for citizen science, please visit this website. It has not only an awesome catalog, but it also has a community. It also has a way for you to share your own game or app or whatever it is or resource. This is a place that the government is hosting this conglomeration of awesome citizen science projects. So hard challenges that the government is really invested in tackling. This one even looks a little bit like a video game board, which is awesome. So this nexus between water, energy, and food is a perfect example of a really complex social issue that is just exactly what video games are good at helping people navigate and understand. Is a really complex system that has rules and has resources and has interactions and can be displayed only through a well-designed, some kind of well-designed interface or well-designed experience that helps you find your place in that system. And we need tools that really help people navigate these complex systems. Especially in our current media landscape, it's very hard for people to understand how they fit into the issues we talk about. And so games are really vital and critical technology for us to help citizens do that. Smart cities, falling right off of that, is another initiative that we have. There's an amazing group called the Metro Lab Network, if you're interested or working in this particular set of issues, where we are trying to figure out what are all of the technological innovations and the innovative approaches in government and in the public-private space to help cities modernize, to help them do energy efficiency better, to help them do water treatment better, transportation better, all of those things, and to help citizens navigate and participate in all of that and improve their cities and not feel like the city is this disconnected beast from them, that they're really part of that whole system. The Opportunity Project is a similar effort that Seth mentioned briefly this morning, which is just this fantastic open data source of all of these federal and state and local data sets that a developer, anyone can come and use these data sets. You can see sort of the networks between cheap transit options and free and reduced lunch communities and internet connectivity places and Wi-Fi hotspots and like all sorts of really important resources that we need more citizens services built on because it's really in networking those things that you can find not only opportunities to help citizens and connect them to support, but also where are the holes that we need to fill and how do we help citizens feel like they're part of contributing to that spread of services. Refugee education is also something that we need this community to recognize it can have a really positive impact on. A lot of refugee youth have smartphones and communicate on apps through social media, WhatsApp or Twitter or Facebook. How can we take really important learning opportunities and deliver them to the platforms that they're already on? How can we make sure that there are opportunities to gain skills training and to see important updates about policy or whatever it is that helps these kids navigate, or help them navigate their health and mediate that? These are the kinds of tools that we really need this community to create, or at the very least, tap into the places where these youth are already communicating so that they're taking advantage of those. And finally, space. Glorious space. We actually have an initiative. We brought together a bunch of awesome sci-fi writers and media folks in San Francisco. A guy in our office called Lloyd Whitman is leading this effort to do homesteading in space, which basically means using media to inspire the next generation to be the first generation that reaches Mars, to place humankind on another planet and beyond. And science follows science fiction, and we recognize that, and we want to inspire, and we want this community to feel like it is helping shape that narrative moving forward. So this is the second boring part of my talk, is making sure you're aware of all of the funding opportunities that exist if you're working in something in one of these areas. So SBIR, IES/Ed, I don't know if Ed Metz is in here, but he's a wonderful dude who works at the Department of Education and has funded countless games through this grant program, good games, and with a fair amount of resources available to do so. His contact information is there, and if anyone wants any of this stuff, you can come grab it from me afterward. IES/Ed, IES is the Institute for Educational Sciences. This is a grant more focused specifically on research around some of these technologies. Really, any kind of educational technology, you can get some funding to make sure that it has high efficacy, it has a real impact, or if it doesn't yet and it needs to be tweaked or improved, you can figure out and get some support to do that. SBIR and the Science and Technology Transfer Program. So this is another one focused on making sure that technologies built in the research world then transfer into real products and can have some sort of real impact there. NSF also funds pre-K or pre-K through 12 education and has funded games through some of its grant programs. And the National Endowment for the Arts, and I didn't include them, but the National Endowment for the Humanities also, just because I was throwing this together pretty last minute, they actually fund video game programs, projects that are focused not only on education, but on just moving the digital media field forward and recognizing that it can contribute to how we think about social issues and how we, and just the artistic community at large. So, another awesome one. So now I'm going to do a quick few thoughts that I've thrown together just at the end of, almost at the end of our conference here. So just from listening to some of the conversations and thinking about what do we really need to address on a meta level if we're going to see games and learning move forward as a field. So with that in mind, I think one of the important things that we want to talk about is what are the experiences that we're building and how are they contextualized for real educator needs? And Seth touched on this morning, but when we talk about the experiences, the amazing experiences in a game, or especially like all the positive energy and excitement around virtual reality and augmented reality, or if you've drinking Magic Leap's Kool-Aid, mixed reality, those experiences in and of themselves are not the full classroom experience. They're not necessarily, we're not necessarily yet talking about how that really relates to pedagogy, or even having conversations about the interplay of pedagogy and transforming pedagogy to support or interact with these technologies. And so big E experience, which is, yes, another awful buzzword that I just threw up here, and it's probably already been used somewhere, big E experience isn't just the experience in the game or the app, it's the experience in the classroom. And if we're really talking about and having these conversations which are very ambitious about transforming how we do education, we need to be thinking about not just creating really cool content, but how it matches the incentives and the needs of real educators and the hard job that they're doing. Which brings me to 0.5, which is policy is not very often something that is proactive, but rather if you can create a tool or a thing or a method that is has such powerful incentive that people want to use it and feel that not using it would somehow detract from what they're doing in the classroom and the outcomes that they're trying to achieve, the policy will change to meet that. And a good example of that is Common Core, which is now in 42 states, was not a US Department of Education initiative, much to the narrative that you might have heard. It was, in fact, much more of an organic idea process, and this idea that came out of a number of states and the Gates Foundation to create a common set of standards, not curriculum, then shifted policy to support this idea of creating standards that would allow students from different states to be able to cross between states and not lose their place, and to be able to better recognize what are good quality, high quality learning standards to make sure that students are college and career ready. So when we're thinking about, oh, education is so broken and it doesn't support the thing that we're doing and we need to just change or break down all of the rules, rather than waiting for the policy to change, I really think that our community needs to make sure that there's a value matched to what educators are already trying to achieve underneath some of the policies that they might be constricted by. And if the technology is so powerful that they just need to use it, the policy will change around it. Now, so if you build something awesome like that, it's really important that we don't just take the approach that you can throw that up on Steam and somehow expect that educators will find it. You need to tell educators about your awesome, incredible thing, and you need to make sure that there is data, stories, and a reason for them to give a crap about that thing. Make them feel like that thing is really relevant to the things that they're trying to achieve. Kids can tell when it's second rate, and this comes from my own experience, and if it is not the most flash, bang, whiz, awesome entertainment quality industry thing, kids will actually enjoy it, but you gotta own up to it. And we can make really fun, interesting experiences. I think the problem we sometimes run into in this community is we try and take ourselves too seriously when we do that. And games should be fun, and they shouldn't take themselves too seriously. We should revel in the playfulness and the destructive ability for kids to totally destroy the thing that you've made and find some new way of using it. And here's a great example. It's CoOp, which is not a very high quality game and an awesome one. And also, yes, let kids destroy your thing. They will find all of the holes and problems and things that don't actually contribute to their learning or don't actually meet their needs. And then once you have totally put yourself down before these kids and they have run over your thing and crushed your dreams, then you'll have a much better sense of what will actually be useful for them. And build consciously. So this comes back to a point I was touching on earlier, which is when we're talking about this next generation of amazing tools that really do have the potential to transform how we think about education, we have to make sure that we're thinking about them in the context of helping the kids who will actually benefit from those tools, not the kids who will already have all of the resources to be successful in life, but the kids who can really make a game-changing experience based off of using your thing. Does it connect them to some opportunity that they wouldn't otherwise have? Or does it give them a skill that they would never have gotten access to? And if it's not really rooted in equity of opportunity, then you're not really thinking about transforming education. You're not really thinking about how to get those kids to a different kind of place in life. And two great examples of that are not just recently High Tech High, which is a school out in San Diego, which is a majority Latino school and majority free and reduced lunch school that is totally reshaping how they do education and pedagogy and use technology in the classroom. But think about the Montessori method was built for impoverished kids in Italy back in, I think, the early 1900s, and is now proliferated around the world because it was rooted in really thinking about how to transform kids' lives where they were and who needed it most. And finally, probably most importantly, is when we're talking about all of this awesome stuff, is it's great that we create content, but also how that content allows kids to be in the driver's seat is really important too. When we're talking about this generation creating the next generation of amazing tools and technologies, from the get-go, we want these kids to feel like they're the creators and they're the drivers. And so the more that we're helping them see themselves as problem solvers and developers from a very early age, the better they will be throughout their whole lives. And the president's initiatives totally reflect that. And I will end with a Mackenzie Wart quote, because he is somewhere in the building, but I haven't found him yet, which is, whatever code we hack, be it programming language, poetic language, math or music, curves or coloring, all of these create possibilities of new things entering the world. Not always great things, or even good things, but new things. And inevitably, good things will come from those. So, join us. There is actually a thing called the Federal Games Guild, which Mark DeLaura, I don't know if he's in here, but he and Constance Steinkuhler started this up about 4 years ago when they were in the Office of Science and Technology Policy. This is a federal community of practice that is focused on highlighting and driving the use of games and virtual reality and next generation entertainment technologies to solve real societal challenges. And we want to interface better with people who are actually creating those things. And so we need to hear stories, we need to hear examples, and we need to hear needs and challenges from the community so that the way that we're approaching those challenges is based in the actual developer needs and community needs so that we get some awesome outcomes. And by all means, reach out to me, reach out to some of the folks that I gave you some information on. And with that, if we even have time for questions?
Yeah, you've got 3 minutes.
Awesome.
Go ahead.
I was speaking with Jesse Schell the other day and asked him what the biggest challenge he felt for educational games was. And he said a funding model to actually be able to sell your games and make a living at it. And that sort of relates to your saying policy could adapt to meet needs that are seen. Do you see any work on that?
So I think policy will adapt if there is a really strong incentive for it to adapt. But I think expecting it to fill holes if there isn't already a tool that makes it worthwhile for the policy to change is probably ambitious. So I don't think that we have a really clear answer yet about what are the distribution models that are going to really make some of these things incredibly viable, but I think there are examples of groups that are doing this well. So Glass Lab Games does a subscription model with all of their content. Brain Pop, I think all of their content is a la carte. It's open for any educator to use. There is a community here of awesome people who are trying to figure out that question. I think what you will see too over the next couple of years, as Richard mentioned this, is in the next few years, we're shooting to have 99% of schools connected to internet access. And some of that FCC funding will also go towards devices. And as that proliferation happens, there will be more of a pipeline of not just the technological things that will enable these technologies, but also schools and districts will invest in the talent to be able to take advantage of those things. And as more districts have CTOs and more districts have tech or science coordinators, you will see them perking up and recognizing that they can buy your product and it can have some sort of impact on students. So I think that that'll happen, but it's an iterative thing. I don't know if that's helpful. One more. Gordon, wait, I'll go for Gordon and then I'll come back to you really fast. Got a laugh line there. So I will say part of this process of us trying to get these stories and examples is so that we can make a really strong case for whoever comes in next that supporting this technology and supporting this community is really important and valuable. And the better that we can make that case as we leave, and as career folks are able to carry that message into the next administration, the more likely it is that it will stay on. But there is no playbook, even though we've been doing this transition thing for 200 years. So, and then you had a quick one?
Yeah, just really quick. The White House Game Jam, I saw the presentation. It was great. In general, I have a concern around the concept of game jams because it seems to send the message to like the youth that you can put nerds in a room for 48 hours and they're going to get, you know, the quality of game that you're talking about. And if you're looking at something where you have that sort of authentic assessment and deep action, that takes many months of really smart people that can put their feet on the and work together on a shared vision. And you know what I mean? It's, so
Right.
it's not a specific comment on that game jam. It's just that's the thing that makes me nervous about that practice.
Sure. So I think hackathon skepticism is healthy. I think it's important that when we gin up those kinds of events, we make sure there's some sort of network for that community to hopefully move some of those projects forward. And Glass Lab, who participated, actually did release one of the games that they built. And who knows if Magic Leap is maybe working on something. However, I think the other value that we find out of some of those events is what Seth was talking about this morning, is we need technical talent to recognize it can have a powerful role in government. And the more that that interface happens, where the games industry doesn't feel like it's way over here and it's just doing its own thing, and government feels like it's over here and they have nothing in common, when in reality there are challenges that require the intersection of those two. Even if that event doesn't produce the game-changing solution, it gets those two communities to recognize that if they work together, there is potential good, potential energy to do something. So I think you're right to be skeptical, but I think we also want to make sure that in this moment of technological change, the government and those industries are working together. And that's it.